Power Pivot in Excel is a very powerful tool where we can connect multiple sheets in Excel, where we can create analysis, and where we can also have access to many different tools, such as pivot tables, charts, KPIs, and many more. And here I have an example of the pivot table within the Power Pivot in Excel. As you can see, I have multiple sheets: delivery data, items list, and also sales. It's very different than the standard version of the pivot tables in Excel, because with the pivot tables, the standard one in Excel, we have access to just one sheet at once. But here in the pivot tables within the Power Pivot, we can access many different sheets. So I can basically connect, let's say, information, an option that I have within the items list, such as the item name, with the total price in the sales, and I also can append a KPI that I have here as the status, as you can see. That way we can connect multiple different sheets to help us create analysis in Excel. So let's see in a practical way how the Power Pivot in Excel can help us on a daily basis to solve problems, to automate tasks. And also, what is the benefit to use a Power Pivot in Excel over, let's say, pivot tables itself, or over functions and formulas? Let's find it out with practical examples. Let's go. To get started, let's understand first what I have as the data, as the workbook. So this Excel file has three different sheets. The first one is the items list, the second one is the sales, and the third one is the delivery data. Each one of those different sheets have different informations. So let's start with the first one, that is the item list. Here I have informations such as the item ID, the item name, the shelf location, the unit cost, and the last purchase date. Now if I move on to the second sheet that I have, the sales, I have a lot of different informations about the sales date, the item ID, the quantity, and the total price. Now in the last sheet that I have is the delivery date, information about the freight, the delivery, the purchase date, the item ID, and the delivery time in hours for each one of the different orders that I have. So with all those three different datas, I can, let's say, match a couple of different informations to create analysis. Let's say here in the sales, I want to know the name for each one of the items ID that I have. And I also want to bring the total cost. I know that I don't have here the total cost, because what I have is the unit cost for each one of the items. So basically, if I want to have the total cost, what I need to do is bring the unit cost and multiply it by the quantity. But I can do it with the Power Pivot here in Excel. Another thing that I can use, as I want to have the total cost, is the margin. Total price minus cost divided by total price is going to give me the margin, for example. However, instead of talking about theoretical things, let's go to more practical things. Okay, so I'm gonna open here a new Excel file, and then we're gonna enable the Power Pivot here in Excel. And then we can move on and connect all those multiple different Excel sheets and create different analysis. So let's go. With a new workbook here in Excel, I want to go to options. And then with this new window, I go to add-ins. And here I want to select manage, COM, and then go. Here we're going to have a new window that's going to pop up for us. It's very important to mark this option, the last one, Microsoft Power Pivot for Excel. Just check this option and then click OK. Now we're gonna be able to see that you have access to the Power Pivot. And this is the tool that we're gonna use, okay? So let me go back to the file, and then I go to new blank workbook. Just click here, and now we have a new workbook in Excel. I want to go to Power Pivot, and here I'm gonna click Manage. With this new window, we're gonna be able to access our workbook that we want to work in. So let's click here from other sources to open an Excel file. Of course, we have different options from database, from data service, and also from other sources. I want to keep with the from other sources option. Now we can move down and choose Excel file, like this one right here. Click next. And here it's very important to choose the file that we want to use, or actually, in other words, to choose here the path that this file has. So browse. Now you're gonna have access to the computer files. Let me click here in the Power Pivot, the Excel worksheet that I want to use. Now I'm gonna click here, open. You can see the path of this Excel file. And something that is very important is to make sure you check and mark this option to use the first row as column headers. As we saw before, all the different tables that I have as headers. So this is why I'm checking here this option. Now I'm gonna click next. Excel is gonna load here the different tables that I have. And as you can see, I have the three different tables. And I also have a fourth option. So why is that? Let's start first understand what I have here as the options. I have the item list, the sales, and the delivery data. Okay, it's perfect. The three different sheets that I have in Excel, in the workbook. But I also have here a fourth option that is about a filter that I used before in one of those sheets. Okay, so this is why I have a fourth option. It's about a filter that I used before. So I don't need to select this specific option because it's just a filter of the sales, as you can see here. Filter in the sales. I want to keep with the first sheet, the second, and the third one. The fourth one, we don't need to select, okay, because it's just a filter that I applied in the sales sheet. Now let me click here, finish. Excel is going to take a couple of seconds to load the data, and then I can click close. Now we're going to be able to see and access the different data that we have. Delivery data, items list, and sales. So all those three different sheets that we have. And as I said before, I want to make some changes here in the data. I am in the sales sheet, and I have the item ID. If I also want to add here a column that is stand for, let's say, the item name, I can do so because I can match the item ID with the item name. But before we match things here in the Power Pivot, it's very important to click in the diagram view, because with the diagram view, we're going to be able to match things. So let's say, what can be our common point that we have in all those different sheets? Or in other words, we need to have a common point to match the informations. And fortunately, we have one, that is the item ID, because we have the item ID in the first sheet, in the second one, and also in the third one. So we can match those informations, and that way we can have corresponding values. So I can take here the item ID, click, hold, and drag, and move to the item ID that I have in the delivery data. Click, hold, and drag to make the connection, like this. And as you can see, I'm connecting just an unique item ID, or there's no repetition in the items list. So I'm connecting the item ID with multiple items IDs. And I can do the same thing with the item ID in the items list and connect with the items ID sales, like this. Now we're done. There is a connection in between all those multiple Excel sheets. And we are using as criteria the item ID because it is the common information throughout all those different sheets. Now we can go back to the data view, click here, and as you can see, nothing's changed here. But we can make the changes now. If I want to add a new column matching, let's say, the item ID with the name, we can do so. We can go to the add column, let's say in the sales, and here, equals sign relate. This is the function that I want to use. Want to select the function, and I want to relate, let's say, with the items list that I have with the item name. So this one right here, I want to bring it back the item name that I have in the items list. So double click here, want to close parentheses, and then enter. As you can see, now we have a new column that are basically matching the ID with the name of each one of the products. We can also double click in the column name, want to be able to rename it. This one is going to be the items underscore items names, or items names. Oh, okay, enter. A new column that I want to add here in the sales, maybe we can bring back the unit cost. So equal sign, and as we did before, the relate function, want to select. Now I want to bring the unit cost. Double click here, want to close parentheses, and then enter. Now we have the unit cost. But in order to be able to calculate the margin, as we have not the unit price, but the total price, that is basically the unit price multiplies by the quantity, I also need to have here the total cost and not the unit cost. So I can change within the cell itself. I can click here in the formula bar, and I want to multiply this result. So asterisk after the last parenthesis, asterisk the quantity. So I can select here the quantity, like this, simple as that. Now I can press enter. And as you can see, all those values now have been updated for me. I can double click now in the name of the column, want to rename. Now we have the total underscore cost, enter. With this new column right here, I want to create the margin that is going to be equal. So we can see here through the formula bar, equal sign, open parentheses, total price minus total cost, close parentheses, divide by the total price, like this. Of course, there's many different ways to calculate the margin, but this way here is the way that I like the most. You can use your own manner, okay? Let me hit enter, and we're done. Double click again in the column's name. I have the margin, enter. And I can also change those values to percentage, because now we have a lot of decimal places here, just a standard number, right? So we can change to, let's go to the home tab and use here the percentage symbol, like this. Now we have the percentages. And of course, we can create many different analyses here using the different sheets that we have, delivery data, items list, and sales. But I think we already learned how to create analysis using the Power Pivot. So let's move on to something different. Let's say I want to use some pivot tables. The pivot table here in the Power Pivot is going to be slightly different than the one that we have in the Excel, the standard one, let's say. We have a table in Excel, and the way we can create pivot tables to reorganize the data, to slice and dice the data, to create analysis. But in the Excel itself, in the standard way, let's say, we have one table and one pivot table. Here we have three different tables, three different sheets, and we're gonna combine those sheets in the pivot table itself, so we can slice and dice, reorganize the data using the, let's say, a data that is in the first sheet with the data that is in the second one, with the third one, and on and on. So let me click here in the pivot table to have access to a pivot table. I want to use an existing worksheet, and I want to place the pivot table in the first cell right here, A1. Let's click OK. And as you can see, now we have the pivot table. To the right, we have the options that we can use. And as I said before, we have all those three sheets: delivery data, items list, and sales. And if you click in the arrow, you can open more options. I want to see each one of the items that I have. I can take the items through the items list. Click, hold, and drag, and drop here in the rows, because that way each one of the rows is going to be a different item, as you can check here. Or sorry, it's not the item ID. Instead of using the item ID, of course, it's already working, but I want to use the item's name. So how can I read off this information? Just click and then remove field. Let's take here the item name. Click, hold, and drag and drop in the rows. Now each one of the rows is going to be a different item. B vitamins, calcium, iron, and omega-3, and on and on. Let's say I want to know the total sold for each one of the items. Or actually, we can take the margin that we have in the sales and use the margin here in our analysis. Let's take the margin, click, hold, and drag and drop here in the values. Now we're going to have an addition, a sum of the margins, as we can see here. But instead of using the addition of the margins, I want to make something different. Let's click here and then value field settings. Instead of sum, I want to use average and then click OK. Now we have the average of the margin. And the first analysis that we can see here, or the first result, is we can see the item that has the lowest margin, that is the zinc, and the one that has the largest one, that is the iron. With those two different, let's say with this analysis, we can create solutions and we can see results. We can see that the iron has a good margin and the zinc has not. So we can create strategies to try to sold more zinc with a better margin and to keeping pushing more iron with better and better margin, let's say. So this is the benefits to use pivot tables through the Power Pivot here in Excel. But we're not done yet, because Power Pivot in Excel has many different tools. We can create KPIs, we can create charts, we can create pivot tables like the one that we are using here. But let's go to the KPIs. Let me click here, KPI, and then new KPI. Let's see if we can do. Excel is gonna pop up here an error message that is telling us you do not have any measures. You cannot create KPIs. So what is a measure here in Excel? Basically, or in Power Pivot, basically is a calculation that we can create to be the reference of our KPI. So let's create a measure. Let's click OK, and let's go back to the Power Pivot. And here in the Power Pivot, we can create our measures. Underneath here, the data, as you can see, the data are being separated from this new area, or this blank area. In this blank area that we have, we can create anything that we like. If I roll down here the data, I can see more and more rows. But these cells here keep the same. So we have always a blank space to input any information that we like. And in those new cells, I want to input a calculation. That is, can be an addition of the total price. That way we're going to have the total sold. So this can be a measure, okay? The total sold, that is, then addition, add up all the values that we have in the total price. Simple as that. So this is a measure in the Power Pivot. And something very important to tell is, whenever you create here in this blank area that you have, you create a cell with a calculation. Even though you have, let's say, 100 different rows with data above it, if you updated the data and now instead of have 100 rows, you have 1,000 rows, it doesn't matter. It's not going to change. It's not going to spill over the data, the new data, through the calculation that you did in the cell, because this cell is in a relative position. So if we place the cell, let's say, with 2 rows underneath the data, it's always going to be 2 rows underneath the data. Even though the data updates with more, gets, let's say, new 100 different rows, it's going to always keep the calculation 2 rows underneath it. And here I want to equal sign, and to add up all the values that we have in the total price, equal sign in the cell, and then sum function, want you to select, and I can choose all the different datas or all the different sheets that we have: delivery data, items list, and also the sales. That is the sheet that I want to use. I want to use the information that I have in the sales, more specific, the total price. Double click here, want you to select. Now we're going to have a sum, an addition of the sales total price. Close parentheses, and if I press enter, you're going to see here that we have a new cell with a new calculation. This one is called measure 1. That is a sum of the total price in the sales sheet. I can also change the measure 1 name to another thing. So let's say, but it's very important to keep the column, okay? You need to keep the column. Instead of using measure total sold, you can't read it off the colon, okay? You need to keep the colon, the 2 dots, and then enter. Okay, now rename the calculation. Now we can go back to the workbook that we are using, the pivot tables, and now we can click in the KPIs, because now we're going to have access, new KPI, to different analysis. And as you can see here, the total sold, the name that I gave to my calculation is appearing here. If you have more than one measure, you can click here and choose different measures. I want to use absolute value, and let's say my measure, I want to use, we're going to change here the average of margin to the total sold, for example. So as my absolute value, I want to use $4,000, and anything that is 40% less or equal to $40,000 is going to be highlighted with a red color. Anything that is in between 40% and 80% of my absolute value is going to be highlighted with this yellowish color, and anything that is greater than or equal to 80% is going to be highlighted with a green color. We can also choose different options of icons. Let's say I want to keep up with this second to last option. I'm going to click OK, and as you can see, now we're going to have a different column with numbers, 1, -1, and 0. But instead of using numbers, I want to use the icons itself. And I also want to make some changes here. Instead of using the average of the margin, I want to read it off this information. And I also want to read it off this total sold status. So let's go here to the values, total sold status, click here, remove field, average of margin, read it off this option too, like this. Now as the values, I want to use the information that I have in the sales, basically the total price. Click here, click, hold, and drag into the values, like this. Now we have the total sold for each one of the items. And of course, again, we can see the item that just sold the most, the item that sold the least. And we can also take now in the sales, the total sold, that is the KPI that we created before. Click here in this arrow and choose, let's say, status. Click in the status, click, hold, and drop here in the values. As you can see, now we have the icons for each one of the values. And as we said before, anything that is 80% equal to or greater than 80% of my target, that is $4,000, is going to have this green color. Everything that is lower than 40% is going to have this red color, and anything in between is going to have this yellowish color. So basically, this is how we can use Power Pivot in Excel with many different tools, using pivot tables, using KPIs, and also connect the data through a common point. So I hope this video can help you out starting to understand how powerful the Power Pivot in Excel is. And if you have any questions or any suggestions to the next videos or about any subject, let me know, comment down below, and I see you tomorrow as every day has a new video. I see you there.